Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is segment 2 of our journey in faith in the light of the cross. Now, 3 days later, on Easter Sunday evening, Jesus appeared to the disciples to confirm what they felt and saw as Jesus died on the cross on Good Friday. And now we are on Easter Sunday, and we look up here at our readings. And it says, on the evening of the first day of the week, when the doors were locked for fear of the Judeans, Jesus came, stood in their midst, and he said, "Peace be with you." Now, all of these words are loaded. They're wonderful words. And we look up there, Jesus came through the locked doors for fear of the Judeans. He came through their locked hearts also, because the disciples were hiding in the upper room in fear. And as long as they were in fear, they were not allowing themselves yet to feel the fullness of God's grace working inside them. But Jesus comes through the locked doors, but he also pierces their hearts because they see the wounds of Jesus. He carries the wounds, stood in their midst, and he said, "Peace be with you." And after this, he showed them his hands and his side. When he showed them his hands and his side, they had this sense that they were above the natural time. They were in a new time zone, in eternity. And there was a oneness between the crucifix and the resurrection because of the wounds. And the glory and radiance of God's glory didn't come out of Jesus despite the wounds, but exactly through the wounds. Because Jesus had taken all the shame of the world, and all the rejection of the world, and all the abandonment of the world. And he took it upon himself, and he gave it to the Father, and the Father works through this to reveal his glory to the world. And so Jesus now is going to redeem the pain of the cross and come to them with the wounds, and so he touches their wounds. They felt ashamed of Jesus, and they had abandoned him and rejected him, but they had felt that Jesus had abandoned and rejected them. And so they carried these wounds. And when you think about it, when we talk about our achievements, we want to separate ourselves and distinguish ourselves from other people. But when we talk about the shame, we all experience the shame that darkens our minds and hearts and makes us make terrible decisions that we regret the rest of our lives. So Jesus now comes with those feelings of shame, rejection, and abandonment, and he says, "Peace be with you." And they say, well, how can we have peace? Well, there's different types of peace. We think of this word, Jesus says, the peace I give is not like the world gives. They first of all feel that their lives are no longer feeling apart, that maybe the value of their lives and the value of following Jesus is not wasted. They feel that maybe there is power and value to their lives and power and value to the life of Jesus. And their feelings are no longer shattered, and their thoughts and feelings are no longer scattered. And they start focusing and thinking of what's going on, and Jesus says to them, "Peace be with you," and he shows them his hands and his feet, that he is the same one that was crucified on the cross, and there is a oneness to all of this. And then he breathes on them, and they realize he's been talking. Well, his natural breath left him on the cross, and here he is breathing this new breath of life, and he's like a breath of fresh air. And he comes into this dark little room where they are gathered in the stench of a little room, and he breathes this fresh air on them. And he says, "Whose sins you forgive are forgiven." A lot of people want to study the Trinity and theological treatises. You don't study the Trinity, you feel it. And they breathed a fresh breath of air. They felt God's presence. At the crucifixion, they went to the crucifixion feeling God had abandoned them. They weren't breathing right. They felt awful. They were in the upper room and they wondered, could they breathe? And they're breathing God's presence, and they feel lifted up. And he says, "Receive the holy breath of life. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven. Whose sins you retain, they are retained." Now, when you allow people to be forgiven and you forgive them, then they feel wonderful, but you do. The disciples' last problem was they couldn't forgive themselves. They couldn't understand why they had been not able to see what Jesus was doing, and they shamefully rejected and abandoned him. But Jesus says when you forgive others, then you feel forgiven. Then you start feeling right. It is even more powerful when we see this little paraphrase down here. Forgive in Hebrew is unbind. When you forgive others, you unbind them. When we live in shame, we hide ourselves like Adam and Eve did when they felt shame before God. They put clothing on, but we put psychological clothing on. We put all sorts of things to hide our shame. We only want people to see the good. But when we admit that we also cannot make it without God, without God's grace, I can't make it. No matter how hard I try, I can't see clearly. And in my confusion and in my shame, I make terrible decisions like the decision the disciples made in rejecting and abandoning Jesus. But with God's help, I come out of it and he redeems my life. And so I can be forgiving to others. And when I'm forgiving to others, I unbind myself. And gifts and talents come out of me that I didn't realize I had. And the disciples felt this was happening as they followed Jesus, but now they really wanted it to happen. And they felt good for the first time. And that song that they felt in their heart, that we sang the old rugged cross, leaving the crucifixion, they had another song in their heart. And this song is expressed by another song that we sing all the time and makes a lot of sense to us. Amazing grace. God lifted me when I was down and thought my life was falling apart and nothing could go right. Can you sing with me? How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. In my confusion, I made terrible decisions. I once felt lost, and when I felt lost, I did nothing right. But now, God comes to me in my darkness. And he says, I can make sense out of all your struggles and even the mistakes you made. This is all about surrendering to God's amazing grace. So thank you for ending this second segment with us.